joining us, and I see still quite a few people coming in. For this presentation and training, we are actually going to use both the question and answer dialog box and optionally the chat box. So, you all are welcome to introduce yourselves in there. You can say your name, pronouns, your location, why you're here. Trying to get that community feel. You by no means are obliged to use the chat box, right? Let's be realistic. I know some folks probably have one earbud in and are making dinner for their kids, or they're out driving, and that's totally fine. But if you're sitting at your computer and you want to use that chat function, you're welcome to. But again, if you have questions that are specific for us as a team, then definitely use that question and answer box. Okay, so let's start. We have a lot of things to cover, and we've had a lot of people interested in this webinar. So let's start by just going over what we're planning to learn today. And also, the magic of this is that my awesome colleague Jessica Howard is running these slides virtually. So if you hear me talking to someone about slides, it is Jess, and I'm not losing it from all the isolation that badly yet. Okay, so again, we have a lot to cover, but we'll start with an introduction just to get us in that headspace of district attorneys and courtrooms, right? And then we'll drill down and really define what district attorneys are, what is their role in governance, what is their function, responsibilities. And then moving into what I'm sure a lot of folks were drawn here for, which is moving into the impacts of district attorneys and all the decisions and powers that they have. So we'll look at some of the choice points that district attorneys have and how some choices can lead to better outcomes for a community and some do not. And then after that, we'll look at how we can hold district attorneys accountable. And let me say, it's a spoiler alert. It's through voting. It's through the electoral process and beyond. We're going to hold them accountable after, but right now, between now and the election, a little more than 90 days, we have a really, really important opportunity to get the candidates' positions on key civil liberties issues and to raise the profile of other civil rights and civil liberties issues that we care about in our communities. So we'll talk about that a bit, and then specifically why ACLU of Colorado is looking into Judicial District 18. That's my little teaser about that. And then we were so excited to have, I'm sure you all know her, Denise Myas, who is our Public Policy Director, who is going to be on for our question and answer portion. Oh, there she is. Hello, Denise. So again, all of your great questions, please plug them into the question and answer portion. But before we get into all that content, let's just talk a little bit about some norms for our learning community. Oh, goals, sorry. How can I forget goals? Organizing is all about goals. Okay, so we have a few goals. Just keep these in mind as you're listening, observing, and learning. One of the goals is pretty obvious here, is to understand the role of DAs. It seems obvious, but there's more to DAs than we may think. I feel like we hear about them sometimes, on the news, or if there's a high-profile case. But do we actually understand where they live in the system, in the structure? And then also off of that, clearer understanding of the criminal legal system and its root effects on civil liberty issues, racism, and social disparities. For folks who feel like it, please participate in the webinar chat and let us know if by chance you are attending today because you have concerns, or you have more than concerns, you have demands about addressing systemic racism and demands about changing those systems and creating new ones. Because DAs have a huge role in that. And again, so this is kind of our conceptual goals, but then these last two are like, how are we going to operationalize? How are we going to take this beyond our brains, beyond the space that we are all sharing now, and scale it out so we can really make a difference? And so that brings us to feeling comfortable talking to your friends and family about the role of DAs, educating them a bit. So going beyond a specific instance or argument and being like, hey, this is a district attorney. This is what they do. They're elected. And then, of course, this is an advocacy presentation, so we want you to get involved. We have many ways for that, and we'll get to that at the end. And then you'll hear at the ballot and beyond, and that's just to get us used to the idea that we know this for all elected officials, is that we have to keep them accountable after Election Day, right? You know, we'll take a fun break in between, but we have to keep them accountable after Election Day too. Now we can talk about norms and a little bit of the recognition of the moment that we're in. Okay, so you can read these on your screen, both for those just listening in. The norms are: we encourage you to participate and ask questions along the way. We encourage you to be open-minded to learning and respect others' experiences. And so you might say, what is this? Preschool? I already knew this. But we are being very intentional here, right? And being very explicit, because we have people from all backgrounds and all walks of life coming to participate in this training. And especially because we're in a virtual space, so there's even more of a breadth of types of folks with different experiences and perspectives. So, you know, you might have someone who's directly impacted, who has spent time in the criminal legal system. You might have someone who is just concerned and has a privilege of not being ensnared in that system. And you might have someone that just wants to, like, look in on the peripheral, maybe is an attorney who wants to see what's up with ACLU. So we have a variation, but let's remember the common thread that we have is that we're all here because we care about district attorneys. We're all taking time out of our day because we care about district attorneys and their impact in our communities, and I suspect likely their impact on racial justice. Oh, and another thing, I just want to pause briefly-ish and really recognize the moment we're in. You know, this is an intense moment socially. We're in the space of a reckoning, I think, and amongst white folks, at least hopefully the beginning of a bit of an awakening to this systemic and deep-rooted racism in our government systems. And, you know, there is so much to learn. There's so much to know. And especially, again, for those who of us are privileged enough not to have been ensnared in the criminal legal system. But we're of the mindset that before we go, you know, to the candidates or to our friends and family, that it's really valuable for us to get an understanding, really zoom out and look at the structure of the criminal legal system and where district attorneys are, what they affect, and take that time to educate ourselves so that we have such a strong foundation. So as things that kick up, as things intensify, especially towards the election, we have this foundation and we can help educate and ground people. And then I also do want to recognize that we need to understand, again, understanding the system in order to overhaul it or replace it, but also just wanted to say that, you know, reforming district attorneys' offices, we're not proposing this as a silver bullet solution, right? But in the fight for racial justice and in the fight to upend systemic racism, we really can leave no stone left unturned, and district attorneys are a big stone, or an important domino, right? And so this isn't saying don't do this, only do district attorneys. It's saying, hey, let's do it all. Like, this is district attorneys, right? We're in a movement, and it's one of the components. So I just wanted to ground us there, because we know the fight for racial justice is going to go beyond November 3rd, but we also know that November 3rd is such a key portal for us to go through so that we have a better playing field to fight for after November 3rd, or fight on after November 3rd. So before I kick it over to Kalea, who is awesome, I just wanted to invite you all to think about your own communities while this is going on in your own neighborhoods. And I also want you to keep reminding yourself that district attorneys are holding a public office, and so they are accountable to constituents and our values, just like the president, just like our state level representatives, just like our mayors, and just like our city councilors. So with that, let's get into the meat of this, and I'll toss it over to Kalea.
Thank you, Jen. That was like perfect. You pretty much captured what we want you all to be thinking of while we're going through this. But just to sort of set the stage for our District Attorney 101 education, I'm going to read you some statistics, and I want you to really take these in for the moment. So 4.6 of Colorado's population is Black and 21.8% is Hispanic. Nonetheless, in April of 2020, Colorado jails reported that 12% of their inmates are Black and 27% are Hispanic. There are approximately 13,000 people in Colorado's jails, and more than 50% of them have not been convicted of a crime and are held only because they cannot afford to pay the bail money for their release. Nationwide, an estimated 11.8 million people misused opioids in 2016. In 2018, Colorado reported 543 opioid overdose deaths. And lastly, in January of 2020, a study recorded more than 9,800 people as incarcerated in Colorado's 57 jails. Approximately 1,214 of those people were homeless. Now, I have a question for all of you to get your brain thinking, and I encourage you to participate in the chat and answer the following question. Which court actor plays the biggest role in affecting these statistics? Do you think it's A, the judge? Do you think it's B, the defense attorney? C, the district attorney? D, the jury? Or E, the police? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to this question. You can respond in the chat, and I'll let you do your thing. So far, we're getting a lot of C's. We got one E, the police, nice. Lots of district attorneys, I see folks. The judge, okay. See, so we've got a bit of a variety of answers here. Even some people think it's the jury, which is all very valid answers. I'm just going to stop you there and jump right into it. So our answer is actually C, district attorney. So for all of you those who answered district attorney, congrats, you're correct. And the reason why this is because the district attorney wields the most power and in comparison to all of those other options. So whether you responded in the chat or thought about it in your brain, I'm going to go ahead and debunk why each of the other answers aren't correct. So let's talk about the judge. So who is the judge? The judge's key role in the criminal legal system is to hear and decide upon legal matter in court. The district attorney has a greater influence in contrast to the judge because the DA brings the charges, the sentence length, and the punishment as well. As a result, the judge holds less discretion in length and severity in charges. Let's look at the defense attorney. So for those of you who answered B, while the defense attorney holds an impactful role, they're on the defense and, hence their name. They work to ensure that clients' rights are protected during the criminal proceedings, but aren't as influential in the statistics that we showed you. Let's talk about the jury. Now, if you felt that the jury is most impactful, the truth behind many juries is that they can be manipulated by the prosecutor in a trial. And so a member of the jury can be removed, which is exactly why the district attorney is more influential. And last but not least, the police. So without diminishing how important the role of police are in these statistics, they're kind of the tip of the iceberg to our criminal legal system. At the end of the day, the district attorney wields way more power over the final determinations of criminal charges and sentencing on folks when it comes to those statistics specifically. Now, wrapping all of that together, now that you've been giving the context about statistics and the role of other court actors besides the district attorney, Jess is going to give you the full spiel on what a district attorney is, what they do, and Jess.
Thank you so much, Kalea. So now that we have set the stage for us to discuss the most important role in the criminal legal system, and that is of the district attorney. So here I'm going to go over with you the role of the DA and the power that they wield in the lives of people who are trapped in this system. But first, let's start with some groundwork. What exactly is a district attorney? So the exact position title and the scope of the office varies by state, but essentially a district attorney is a public official appointed or elected as the chief prosecutor to represent state government in criminal cases within their jurisdiction. So they can also go by titles like prosecuting attorneys, and they really play a major role in determining the way criminal cases are initiated and resolved, from the charging decisions to the sentencing. Really, district attorneys are really this legal entity that is responsible for presenting a case against an individual, initiating and directing further investigations against that person, and guide and offering sentencing recommendations. DAs really are making these choices every day that determine which laws are enforced and against whom, as well as how much punishment they carry. So if nothing else, let's make sure that we leave here tonight knowing that in the state of Colorado, district attorneys are elected officials. They do have eligibility requirements to run for office. And so basically under our Colorado Constitution, they have to have the same qualifications as district attorneys. So what does that mean? They must be licensed to practice law in Colorado for 5 years. They have to be qualified to vote in the Judicial District at the time of their election, and they have to reside in the district throughout the term in office. They are limited to 2 consecutive terms of 4 years each. And also something really important to understand is that the district attorney is considered to be part of the executive branch rather than the judicial branch. And this has really been kind of solidified through state court cases, that even though a district attorney is an officer of the court like any other attorney, and they're elected from a judicial district, the attorney is considered to be a part of the executive branch and really kind of categorized as a peace officer and cooperates with law enforcement agencies such as police and sheriff departments and our Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI. Something that's also really important to know is that according to our reports, even though most district attorneys are elected officials, about 70% of district attorneys run unopposed for re-election. So in the state of Colorado, there are 22 judicial districts, each having their own district attorney's office. They oversee cases in state trial district courts. The district courts, along with the district attorney and the judge, are established under our state constitution. And the districts encompass at least one or more of our 64 counties. So for example, Denver, which is our second judicial district, is the only district that has its separate probate and juvenile courts. And only 4 other counties are their own judicial district, that being Pueblo, Weld, Boulder, and Mesa counties. The title of district attorney includes both the elected district attorney as well as the prosecutors who are in the office. So assistant DA, deputy DA, the support staff. And even though Colorado, the state of Colorado only provides funding for the salary of the elected district attorney, all other staff positions and resources come from taxpayers by the counties that are in the district's jurisdiction. It's also not uncommon for DA offices to have specialized units, and so they can have specialists in crimes such as homicide, domestic violence, or white-collar crime, narcotics, and so forth. So now that we have that foundation kind of set down, let's look into what the power of the district attorney looks like. Again, as we stated before, the district attorney is a major player in determining the way cases are initiated and resolved, from the charging decisions all the way to the sentencing recommendations. I think that Adam Foss from the Prosecutor Impact really kind of says it best, and that's prosecutors are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice system. Not the judge, police, legislature, the mayor, governor, not the president can tell us how to prosecute our cases. I think that really just goes to show that even prosecutors know just how much power that they wield. So historically, DAs have wielded their power to pack our jails and prisons, interrupt the lives of defendants and their families, and deepen racial disparities. Essentially, DAs really possess a lot of power to carry out justice. They decide whom to prosecute, what to charge, whether to recommend freedom or incarceration, or whether to dismiss case altogether. So let's look at some of the things that the district attorney has the power to do, the power to charge. So essentially what a charge is a formal accusation of an offense against a defendant, and is really that first step of prosecution in our legal system. So in Colorado, generally, the DA has the final say as to whether a charge or not charge in criminal cases within their jurisdictions. DAs also have the responsibility to gather evidence to prosecute against the accused, and they also have the power of the police behind them to gather that evidence against those charged. So even though prosecutors have the burden of proof of proving someone's guilt, they also have the responsibility to hand over evidence that might exonerate a defendant from conviction. And this is called exculpatory evidence. So unfortunately, we've probably seen so many stories, especially in the media, of district attorneys withholding that essential information of defendants, and therefore defendants are having to gather that evidence to secure their freedom, which really can be difficult if you don't have a private attorney and you have to rely on a resource-strapped public defender's office to gather that evidence. District attorneys also have the power to determine bail and pretrial detention. So for a bit of context, bail is this process of releasing a defendant from custody while their case is pending in court. So judges like to listen to what prosecutors have to say about a case, including whether bail should be set for a defendant or whether that person should languish in a cage. So although judges make these bail determinations, it's really rare for a judge to order bail for a defendant if the DA has not made that request. Many times DAs may rely on what's called a cash bond, which is basically the requirement that money be paid up front before a defendant is released. And this is usually used as a way to keep people in custody until their trial date, or they even request additional conditions to release that make it hard for defendants to stay out of the cage, such as travel restrictions, ankle monitoring, drug testing, which even have their own financial burdens. And DAs know this, and they know that many people can't afford this to secure their freedom. So therefore, those who can afford to pay their freedom are released, and those who cannot afford to pay stay in the cage. And I think many of us are probably well aware by this stage that those who do end up staying in these cages are disproportionately Black, brown, indigenous, are experiencing poverty, and or have a disability. So overall, we see that this system of pretrial detention is really designed to keep folks in jail, even though these individuals have not been charged, or have not been found guilty of a crime. They are legally innocent, and I think that's really important for us to understand in this process. And yet they are still deprived of their freedom and usually have their activities restricted because of it. District attorneys also have the power to plea bargain. And so what does this look like? So earlier we dispelled this myth that a judge and or jury has the most power to exercise the fate over your criminal case. And this is why. It's because there's this statistic that people need to know. 95% of cases that prosecutors decide to move forward with, the defendant ends up pleading guilty. So what that means is that most people haven't even reached the decision of a judge or their peers before they are already saddled with a criminal conviction. And why is that happening? It's because DAs use what's called plea bargaining to leverage guilty pleas from defendants who don't want to run the risk go back, to run the risk of facing a prolonged mandatory sentence if they're found guilty at trial. And sometimes we call this the trial penalty. It's kind of interesting we call it plea bargaining, because some people actually kind of call it plea extraction, because of, you know, really folks' dire need to say, hey, you know, I could, you know, go to jail for 2 years, or I can try and go to trial and perhaps get 20. If most of us were in that situation, we probably would choose the 2 years, whether or not we did the crime, to avoid this possibility of receiving a longer sentence. The defendant usually takes a plea or takes a deal, pleading to either a lesser offense in exchange for a more lenient sentence or a dismissal of other charges. And this, again, they can do it sometimes whether or not they committed a crime. They can be innocent, but sometimes those are the choices that many folks are facing with and wanting just to move on with their lives. This ends up really shifting the power to determine what's the best form of justice from the judge to the prosecutor, really without much oversight. And that people charged with mandatory minimums often plead to a sentence that the prosecutor wants versus what a judge determines best. I think it's also really important to note that even though the overwhelming majority of criminal cases in the US are resolved through these plea deals, few research has actually been dedicated to the examination of the plea bargaining process. But for the research that has been done, what is very clear is that these, you know, plea extractions, so to speak, are really a major factor in fueling the racial disparities that we see in our legal system. So, for example, Black defendants are less likely to receive any leniency in plea bargain for even having a clean record. And again, that's really because prosecutors really have the discretion in setting plea terms, and like all of us, can bring that bias into the mix. And the last piece is that district attorneys have the power to influence sentencing. So a sentence basically determines the length of an individual's period of incarceration. So if you find yourself to be in that small 5% pool who decides to not take a plea bargain and to try your luck in exercising your Sixth Amendment right to a trial, prosecutors are still going to have considerable power over the length of your sentence if a jury still finds you guilty. That's because during the sentencing phase of a trial, a judge's decision-making is really heavily influenced by the recommendations of the DA, and they usually will often approve whatever sentence the DA recommends. So although district attorneys play this major role in feeding the criminal legal system, it's also important to know that they have the power to reduce mass incarceration rates. District attorneys, again, they can use their discretion to choose between freedom over cages or rehabilitation over punishment. So for example, diversion programs. So instead of revoking bail or sentencing those to lengthy jail stays, DAs can recommend to the court that people be released on what is called a personal recognizance bond, or PR bond, which is really just this unsecured bond allowing defendants to be released without having to buy their freedom. Basically a signed promise that they're going to come back and return to court at a later date. And to release folks on this kind of bond so they can attend programs to receive life-saving services, whether that might be job training or rehabilitation, rather than be incarcerated or serve another alternative sentence. So this way a person can see their criminal charges dropped, and when they successfully complete a program, and then again not be saddled with a lifelong criminal conviction. District attorneys also have the power to dismiss a case altogether. Or I'm sorry, let me make another note about Black diversion programs, is that we know that these are impactful, yet district attorneys don't utilize it as much. But we also want to make a note about diversion programs, is that They also need to be fairly administered and not become these like cash cows for courts to get fees from. We need to make sure that these diversion programs are eligible, you know, that all people can be eligible to access them, regardless of whether they have the ability to pay. And the DAs really need to make sure that they're not offering, that they're not more willing to offer diversion to, say, white defendants compared to Black, Latinx, Asian, and Native American defendants, which sometimes we see in the statistics that actually happening. So there's that. So on to the power to dismiss cases altogether. So the DAs often have more power over sentencing than judges do, as we said beforehand. And ultimately, it really is up to a DA to determine whether they want to pursue a case or not. So because the DA is setting that starting point for the plea negotiations by deciding what the initial charges are to begin with, they are also empowered to reduce serious charges to less serious charges, or to drop the charges altogether that might carry a jail or prison time. Again, you know, district attorneys really have power over the sentencing than judges do. And then also really important is that the district attorney also has the power to champion policy change. Instead of increasing their power, DAs can be lobbying for changes that might be outside of their scope of work, including sentencing reductions, championing more humane probation and parole programs, and providing actually more resources to the public defenders to ensure that those who are too poor to afford private defense have a fair fight against a criminal conviction. So now that we have laid this groundwork of what a district attorney is and the powers that they have in impacting the legal system, we're going to kick it off to Kalea, who's going to really talk to us about how this impacts the community on the outside.
Thank you, Jess. So now that you've been given the basics of district attorney powers, let's really dive into why these decisions are impactful. And we don't often get to see these decisions or these powers being used firsthand, but nonetheless, it is happening. And your district attorney is constantly wielding their powers, impacting your neighbors, and impacting the community around you. So in this next section, I'm going to focus in on connecting these DA powers to the community around us. So let's take a look at those statistics that I brought up earlier in the presentation. Each of these statistics presents itself in a real way in our communities. As I dive into the impact that district attorneys have behind these statistics, I want you to think about your own community and the neighbors around you. So looking at our first statistic, we address the issue of overrepresentation of our Black and Brown communities in Colorado jail systems. The statistic reads that although only 4.6% of Colorado's population is Black, 12% of people in Colorado jails are Black. Additionally, while only 21.8% of Colorado's population is Latino, 27% of folks in Colorado jails are Latino. Now, you might be wondering, how can a district attorney affect this statistic? Well, let's take a look at the DA powers. So I've placed a star next to the powers that directly impact the statistic, and it's pretty much all of them. Ultimately, it just comes down to whether or not your DA is making sure that the right people are being charged for the right reasons. As just mentioned earlier too, placing bail on folks makes a huge difference on whether or not people are in jail or not. And, you know, socioeconomic disparity really plays a big role in that. And I'll touch on that in the next slide. But, you know, keep in mind too, whether or not your DA is actively working to challenge their implicit biases to make sure that they aren't taking harsher actions onto people of color. Now, back to the socioeconomic disparity, the next statistic really touches on how it's clear in our system.
Sorry, it does this.
It's
I don't
okay.
know why it's doing this. There we go.
All right, so this statistic really, really brings to light how socioeconomic disparity plays a role. So there are approximately 13,000 people in Colorado's jails, and more than 50% of them have not even been convicted of a crime. And they're held there only because they cannot afford to pay the bail for their release. Now just think about this for a second, right? More than 50% of people sitting in our jails are legally innocent. I've like starred the power that's most influential, and as Jess already said, this is all within the DA's hands, whether they choose to implement high bail or a PR bond. They influence who is staying in our jails and who isn't. Now, this is so important because when folks are in jails as a legally innocent person, they are forced to miss out on time with their families or time in their jobs, and this heavily influences their life. And this can be anybody from your neighbors to people in your community. So it's super important to keep that in mind. Now, what about our neighbors with substance use disorders? Let's look again at the next statistic. So nationwide, an estimated 11.8 million people misused opioids in 2016. In 2018, Colorado reported 543 opioid overdose deaths. Now, the reason why I brought up this statistic is because we know that the cycle of addiction can lead to interaction with our criminal legal system. Once this happens, your DA plays a pivotal role in their fate. Will your DA wield their power to provide more effective local services like rehabilitation and community mental health, or will your DA instead send these folks into our prisons and our jails to guarantee that their substance use disorders will worse? And I guess is the right word. Now, nextly, let's talk about our neighbors experiencing homelessness and revisit this last statistic. So in January 2020, a study recorded more than 9,800 people as incarcerated in Colorado's 57 jails, and approximately 1,214 of those people were homeless. Now, what is your DA doing? Is your DA using their power to charge, using it to criminalize actions such as sleeping on a park bench? Or are they, using their power to dismiss the case altogether because homelessness is not a crime? And once again, it comes back to bail and pretrial detention. What is affordable for the folks who are experiencing homelessness? Will your DA also use their power of influencing sentencing and recommending diversion programs to screen these folks who come in experiencing homelessness to get better help through diversion programs? So just keep that in mind. Pushing past the statistics I gave, I want to talk about just other things in our community that go along heavily with our district attorney's powers. So when it comes to police accountability, the power to discharge or the power to dismiss the case together is the biggest piece in that. And no one is above the law, not even police officers. And your district attorney can take violence or police-involved shootings seriously by investigating them and holding them accountable, or they can turn a blind eye and choose to dismiss the case altogether. So it's really pivotal that you pay attention to what your DA plans to do when it comes to holding police accountable. Along with those same powers, our immigrant families and friends can be heavily affected. So will your DA be unnecessarily harsh on crime when it comes to immigrants? When it comes to minor crimes or charges, those actions that your DA takes can trigger deportation proceedings and tear families apart by cracking down on the minor offenses. Another alternative that DAs can take is to use their discretion in a way to keep families together. Last but not least, our youth. When our younger generations commit crime, it's often their first touch with the criminal legal system. And your district attorney plays the biggest role in where their future goes ahead. Now, will your district attorney choose to push people into our jails and our prison systems and, you know, prohibit a young person's future opportunities? Or instead, will your district attorney find a better alternative by giving the youth our youth a second chance to learn from their mistakes through diversion programs? So just keep all of that in mind when you are electing your district attorney. Now I'm really going to shift this over to Jen so she can explain to you how we can really hold district attorneys accountable through the ballot box and beyond.
Leah. So that was a lot of information, but we're getting some good feedback and really good questions, which we will get into, and thank you, Denise, for helping answer some of those. And although I did set the own rule that you should use the Q&A box and start answering questions in the chat box, but I won't be able to do that as much because now I'll be talking to you, so maybe go back to the Q&A box. Not a big deal either way. But yeah, so we see all of the impacts that district attorneys have, right? Like, it's like police are the tip of the iceberg and DAs are the bottom of the iceberg. So Kalea just outlined so many issues that really affect Colorado or manifest in Colorado in really specific ways that hit home to us because these are our neighbors and our friends and family. And just to give a quick example of something here in Colorado that our district attorneys can and have done, or a couple of them have done, to really make sure that when they are facing a decision that they're aligning with the values of the community. And so what I'm trying to say is that, or the example I'm giving is that District Attorney Beth McCann, who is out of Denver County, and then District Attorney Michael Doherty, who is out of Boulder County, have both adopted policies which basically state we will make decisions that will put our community members or people in front of us at the least or the lowest risk for deportation. Basically, they made a statement, they showed their procedures on what they were going to do to make sure they weren't deporting community members. That's a really big deal. A lot of district attorneys don't even really post their policies. And that didn't happen by accident. Sure, Denver and Boulder are, they're more liberal, but that still came from the ground up, from this like swelling of community pressure and support. And so the lead up to the election is a critical and strategic time in terms of doing district attorney accountability. For those running in contested races, for those of us living in a space where there's a contested race, whether it's a district attorney or whoever it is, it's a really, really valuable time or powerful time as voters, right? This is the time when people are trying to get elected. They want your vote, they want the job. So there's way more, we're better able to move and pressure candidates into speaking and committing to positions, right? It's much harder when they're in office. It's easier to dodge questions, not really commit to something, et cetera, et cetera. But it's much harder when they're trying to earn the job. So just keep that in mind because that's the space we're in this of roughly 90 days. And so we will give you all a break from us talking, and we're just going to watch this 2-minute video clip from ACLU National about prosecutors, voting, and accountability.
Someone who is representing you, I want them to represent my values, represent as best as possible my swag, my style, but usually they can't keep up with that, but certainly represent me from a moral perspective, from an ethical perspective.
District attorneys are able to perpetuate the system of mass incarceration because either they think that the electorate wants that, or They just don't feel accountable because not enough people know about what they do and not enough people vote.
I think it's worth pointing out that the United States is the only country in the entire world that elects its prosecutors. Everyone else appoints them, we elect ours. The goal was that elected prosecutors would be less corrupt because the appointment process can be corrupted. The voters are a much more pure voice of what the people want. In practice, that's not how it works.
But the DAs, they are often races that people just don't think about, they don't care about, they don't know about.
There's not been a push from communities, from society at large to say, we want a different answer.
This isn't working. We're locking up too many people and it's actually making our communities less safe.
Prosecutors' offices, which are focused only on locking people up and getting the most severe sentences for the most severe charges, are going to make mistakes.
And I think if we allow DAs to simply do what they've always done and never challenge them to get sort of outside of their box, they never will.
And that's why voting is so critical. Well, not just voting from an informed standpoint, and then holding them accountable going forward to stay true to the promises that they made.
The only way that we can hold them accountable is by the public not falling asleep at the wheel.
Okay. So, excuse me, it's a little throat. So let's pause on that one part. I mean, there's a lot to pause on, but the fact, oh, am I muted? No, that's good. But the fact that we're one of the few countries that actually elects our prosecutors. And yet, like we already heard, 70% of district attorneys run uncontested. Last cycle here in Colorado, 17 out of 22 district attorney seats ran uncontested. And yet, poll after poll after poll after poll for the last several years has shown that there's an overwhelming majority of Americans support criminal legal reform. And that's not just Democrats, that's independent and Republicans. And that overwhelming majority spreads across. And so we have this huge gap, right? Like we have constituents who care, and usually if you have an issue that is that agreed upon by a constituency, you would see it reflected by elected officials. But we don't, obviously. Like there's this huge gap between those two things. And that's why we are here right now to kind of sew up that gap a bit. And we know that specifically, or just to be more specific, engaging in the electoral process is one major way to help mend that gap between district attorneys just taking positions uncontested and the overwhelming majority of our community members desperate for change. And so let's look a bit at Colorado, actually. So here in Colorado, oh, you go back one. Yeah, thank you. To the woman behind the curtain. Oh. Yeah, so this one is just an image of Lady Justice. So here in Colorado, we know this, and of course, Denise can speak to this better because she helps win these bills, but we've seen many criminal legal reform bills pass in the past, or a handful of years. And those bills have been sponsored or bipartisan sponsored, almost all of them. Colorado, you know, unlike some of maybe further east or on like the East Coast, Colorado's political culture, you know, we have that libertarian tinge to it, right? And so, you know, our more conservative-minded representatives, sure, we might not agree on abortion access, but they surprisingly will align with, or surprising to, you know, without knowing about our Colorado's political culture, you know, they align with criminal legal reform because they value fiscal responsibility, because we know it's extremely expensive and wasting money to incarcerate people, and they value small government, and they see over-policing as government overreach. And so again, just to have us think about, hey, we know nationwide polls show the support, but here in Colorado, not only do we support it, but at the state policy level, there has been shifts and changes. However, we need that change, we need that mindset and culture to be pushed down to the local level. I think what a lot of the demonstrations sparked by George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and continuing today, they showed us local politics and the importance. I think we're seeing that more and more. Like we have all this insanity going on in Washington, D.C., but what affects us the most happens happens locally. So you all can help us make that change by just by getting involved. And so in Colorado, I see this kind of in the chat. There are, last I counted, let me actually do it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 contested district attorney races last time I looked at the Secretary of State's website. And we know that our partner, the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition, which I can absolutely link you to them, and when I send all those follow-up resources, we know that they have plans to engage in most of those races. And so what that looks like for them is, doing candidate forums and doing kind of candidate questionnaires and education work, kind of like we do. So they are also a really good resource. But here for us at ACLU of Colorado, we know for sure that we are going to be doing a lot of work in and focusing on the district attorney race in Judicial District 18, if you want to go to that slide. Okay, and so Judicial District 18, here are the counties. So it's, I should have put the map up, although just put that other map up. But I want to point out that Aurora, a lot of Aurora rests within Judicial District 18. And so Aurora, districting, if you've ever had the joys of trying to figure out districts, Aurora actually touches 3 counties, but the bulk of it is in Arapahoe County. And Aurora is a really significant place because this is a place where ACLU does a lot of policy and legal work, because there are a lot of civil rights violations, especially by by law enforcement. But Aurora is also really important because it is Colorado's most racially diverse and youngest municipality. And in fact, Aurora is one of the most racially diverse municipalities in the entire West. And so what goes on here is really important because it sets a trend for the rest of the state, kind of like a bellwether. AKA, if we can make good change in Judicial District 18, how will that ripple out and help our entire state? Well, of course, most importantly, helping people in that constituency. And so on the right, you see a map, and I understand that you cannot read it. We'll send that to you. This is more of just a visual. This represents some of the cases that we took between 2003 and 2018. And this is particularly us suing Aurora's police department, which is different, whole different thing than district attorney's office, right? But I'll get into why that's important. We know, I'm sure some of you have been protesting and participating in whatever way you can in all the demonstrations happening in Aurora around Elijah McClain and other abuses. And we know Aurora has a problem, right? Again, $4.6 million between 2003 and 2018. The people on this chart are people's loved ones, neighbors, someone out there who was brutalized because they're trying to get their cat from escaping when police came to the wrong door, right? We know. And so that's more of just a representation to show you why this is important and long overdue. Because we can imagine that if we had a district attorney, like let's say we had a district attorney who, during their last electoral cycle, committed to prosecuting police brutality because they were committed to changing policing culture, right? We might not have had these individuals on this map. And so that's, again, just to kind of show the importance. We can go to the next slide. Okay, and so even if you don't live in that judicial district, it doesn't mean you can't make a difference there, right? And I actually think because we're in this virtual world, it gives an opportunity for even more people to help make a difference in this important district. And so what that could look like is helping us, or what that looks like is helping us to educate and mobilize voters in that district. Be like, hey, this is where your candidates, these are your candidate positions on these civil liberties issues. Here's the information so you can be an informed voter. Or just texting people, hey, don't forget to vote, it's really important. Because the other thing about Judicial District 18 is that last time there was a contested race in that district was 2012. Since 2012 in Colorado, a lot has changed, and especially for Aurora, as Denver exploded, you know, Aurora really expanded. And so it's really, we also see an increase in voting from voting groups that don't traditionally vote, AKA mostly young people, and also communities of color, right? So we've seen that increase since 2012 as the demographic has changed. But we know that newer voters, people who are new to voting, are more likely to skip down ballot offices, AKA the district attorney, because thankfully people don't want to vote on something they don't understand generally. So my point is that you can imagine that a lot of these younger voters or newer voters, wherever they're coming from, might not have the district attorney education and might skip that race. So that's, again, where we as advocates can come in and help, you know, virtually engage with ACLU activists and voters and members and other community members to kind of do that education, engagement, and mobilization to make a difference in Judicial District 18. So if you're interested in any of that, please, you'll see on the top, you can go to that link, which we'll send, aclu.org, vote your DA, and that's where you can sign an accountability pledge. And this is just you pledging that you will pay attention to the district attorney race. And that might seem really simple right now, but you don't know what will happen in these 90 days, and it'll be really helpful for us to help you, to remind you. Also on that form is the option to go beyond the ballot. So if you are interested in doing some more education in your community, if you're interested in helping us do voter turnout, if you're interested in helping us tweet at the candidates, attend their virtual events maybe to see, hey, what is your position on civil liberties issues? You'll have the option to choose that on the pledge. The other thing I want to throw out there is that you all are also welcome to recruit and organize in your own communities, networks, clubs, what have you, if you would like one of these trainings to come to your community group, right, or just your group of friends. For details on that, you can email voting@aclu-go.org. Again, we'll send this out. This third one will be on all actions all the time, is please register or update your mailing address to vote, like update your voter registration, right? This is really important right now because we want to reduce the amount of, the amount of folks who are going to polling places just for the safety of everyone. And so making sure our mailing addresses are updated so that, you might be like taking care, you might live in Durango, but you're taking care of someone for the foreseeable future on the Eastern Plains. You can change it so you're voting, your residence is still in Durango, but you're getting your ballot mailed to Eastern Colorado so you can vote, if that makes sense. So make sure that your mailing addresses are updated, and more importantly, that of your friends. Especially younger people, 30s and below, move about once a year, so it's easily something you slip. And you'll see this also is that we, ACLU of Colorado, is working really hard, especially our policy team, into decarcerating vulnerable people from prison. So AKA people who are at risk for COVID-19 but are stuck in prisons, and our governor has not moved on the issue. But don't worry, we have really loud members. So please follow that link to send a message to Governor Polis and to learn more about that. So there's a lot of talking, and we have a lot of really good questions. So Denise, boss lady, will you please show yourself as this woman behind the curtain thing?
I'm here. I really am behind the curtain.
All right, virtual curtains. Okay, let's start, actually, just because we were just talking about the governor. We have a question from Dakota, who I think will be one of our newest volunteers. And he's asking, has Governor Polis expressed interest or shown leadership in these issues? How much power does the governor have in reforming criminal justice systems? So if you want to speak a little bit to those issues.
Sure. So just on a sort of broad political brush, I think the governor of any state would have a great deal of power in leading reform. Ironically, one of the biggest leaders that we've had in the United States was in the state of New Jersey, and it was actually Governor Chris Christie. He actually led bail reform in the state of New Jersey. So without question, the governor can and could have a great deal of power on any level of criminal legal reform. Our governor, I will say, that has not been one of his pet projects, so to speak. On the campaign trail, he never really spoke to criminal legal issues. I think now he has looked favorably and has signed bills into law that the ACLU has championed in the area of bail reform. He did put together very recently a working group to work on sentencing reform. So I think he is dabbling a little bit in that world, but I think a lot of us know that on the campaign trail, free kindergarten, healthcare issues were pretty much at the top of his list. I will say on the criminal legal system piece, he was a big supporter of repealing the death penalty. That he did campaign on. But these other areas, it's been a lot of work and communication with his policy folks to get them up to speed and sort of enlist their support.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. Oh, this one, Sherry is asking what percentage, and I doubt you'll have the number, but I think we could both speak to this, what percentage of DAs in Colorado are white males? Are district attorneys representative of the diversity of the community? Seems like a plant question. We did not plant that. Thank you, Sherry.
You know, I actually saw that in the Q&A box, and I was going to try to pull up to see the list so that I could actually speak from like a real factual, as opposed to saying, well, no, they don't represent the communities. They're not representative of the communities they represent. The majority are white males. Now here in Denver, we do have Beth McCann. There are some Latinos in the, Alamosa area, Costilla County. But I mean, I don't know the exact breakdown, to be honest.
Yes, okay, cool. I will do that. And then I also wanted to address, I think, or Denise, what about folks who are living somewhere where there isn't a contested race? Should they give up on the district attorney and ignore them until the next cycle, or what could they do?
Well, one of the things that I put in the question and answer box was someone asked, well, what do you do if the DA that you don't like it's an uncontested race? And my answer is recruit somebody. And, there are other ACLU affiliates that have played a bigger role in recruitment. And that's a much harder job. And someone did ask if we had resources on that. And I know this affiliate doesn't, although others may, because that's particularly hard, especially since the ACLU does not endorse candidates. So it's very difficult for us to talk about recruitment. But I would say that, if you have a DA that's going to be up in 4 years, start looking now at really strong public defenders, really strong criminal defense lawyers, and try to recruit. I mean, there's nothing you can do, obviously, now in a district or in a judicial district where you have an unopposed district attorney. I mean, there's nothing you could do about it, at least at this juncture. I hope that answers the question.
What about is there, so I'm thinking like, and I'm comparing this principle with state senators and House reps, we might pressure them. I mean, it's different because they're engaging in a legislative process, but does that really work on DAs? Is it worth a shot? So they do that public pressure like we're seeing in demonstrations and.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I am Well, this doesn't pressure the DA, but I really do believe that a lot of the protests that have been happening of late did lead the governor, for example, to appoint the Attorney General Phil Weiser as an independent investigator in the Elijah McClain matter. I think it drove City Council in Aurora, the mayor in particular, to also put in place an independent investigator. So I do think there is a way in all levels of government for community to play a role. District Attorney McCann has a community engagement monthly meeting or every other week or something that she meets with folks, and that's an opportunity. So I do think that there is a great deal to be said about community engagement, you know, public pressure, public shaming. I think all of that plays a significant role and can make a difference.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think too, like, so many people, and I'm with you, are, honestly, I'll use it, are pissed that the 70% are uncontested. But again, that's why I know it doesn't feel immediately satisfactory. I understand that, I hear that, but why working, if we can make change in Judicial District 18, there are a couple other ones that are contested, that creates a wave throughout, I think, right? Denise, the political system.
Well, it creates a wave without a doubt, but here's like another sort of thing, right, that people wouldn't normally know about, which is very frustrating. But there is what is known as the Colorado District Attorneys Council, CDAC, and they play a significant role at the legislature. And the way that they decide bills to support or bills to oppose is they take a vote of these individuals that sit, all the district attorneys that sit on this DA's council. So having 1, 2, or 3, 4, whatever the number is, of folks that will say, no, we as a council are not going to oppose that bill that advances good sentencing reform or that advances good bond reform. We are not going to oppose that bill. That says a lot, because otherwise they do carry a lot of clout under the dome, and so they can influence legislation. So it's not just a matter of a wave, although that's also super important. We can change the you know, what it looks like in one judicial district. Maybe that influences what the neighboring judicial district will do. But it also matters a lot when it comes to the district attorney's council decisions on whether to oppose or support legislation.
Awesome, that's so helpful, and addresses one of our questions in the chat, which was about lobbying and their legislative power, which they have a lot of. So we want to.
They have a great deal of power. I mean, there are a lot of even you know, Democrats. We refer to them as the squishy Dems. Is they'll be like, well, I don't know what my DA thinks. You know, I need to figure out where my DA is, and you know, of course, try to tell them, well, you have more than one constituent in your Senate or House district, but they do carry a lot of clout for sure.
That's really helpful. And I think too, even if you're living, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, even if you're living, you know, maybe in somewhere that's uncontested and feels like it's not going to change for a while, if you do the work, if you're gathering people, educating them on district attorneys, and then you're raising, in honor of John Lewis, good trouble in your community, you're affecting your whole community. This is more my organizing side. It's not, I understand it's frustrating because it's not quantifiable, but that's how this work gets done. And then your local news reporter might pick up on it because people keep showing up to bother the DA, and that's really how you make the change. And I also want to address, because we're seeing these questions of, you know, how do we create more choice? Again, going back to that gap, we know that people support criminal legal reform, but that there's like this big gap in engagement with district attorneys in the election process. But this has to start with us doing the work of educating friends, family, and other people who care about this, but may not have enough information.
That's right, and I'll just add, I mean, right, one of the best things about this webinar and the best thing about having as many individuals participate in is you spread the word around about the power of the district attorney that folks may have been unaware of until now. I mean, I've been in different settings, and there are a lot of folks that couldn't even name who their district attorney is, and that just shows that we have sort of that their significance or their importance in a lot of things that happen around us has just fallen off our radar. So just even paying attention to it is a game changer.
Awesome. Denise, do you have any insight on the relationship between district attorneys and police unions? Are they buddies or?
You know, I don't know that I could say specifically, but it's probably no surprise that often law enforcement and DAs are typically on the same side, if you will. So for example, when there's legislation that we may be championing that will rid of money bond for certain offenses, you are going to have a natural cohort of folks, DAs, law enforcement, whether it's union or just law enforcement in general, that typically opposes some of those things or wants, you know, big exceptions that lead to big loopholes, et cetera. So they're aligned in the sense that they come from this law enforcement tough on crime perspective, but I don't know if there's, you know, any collusion or anything like that. I just think they naturally align because they come sort of from the same space.
That makes sense. And then I realize we're losing people because we've had you for a while. Thanks for everyone who's staying on this long, but I did want to just, for those who want to stay on, Denise, we have seen, we want to see far more, but we have seen decarceration in jails and prisons throughout Colorado due to COVID-19, but especially jails, and you may have been behind a lot of that work. But what have we seen? Is crime going crazy, or how are we doing? I mean, that was a leading question, but also, what do DAs have to do with it?
Well, no, and actually, that's kind of a good opening for me to go into a couple of things. So I appreciate the question. But yes, we have seen a very, very significant decrease in our jail population, and we're at the early stages of trying to figure out what's the real genesis of that. We do think a lot of it comes from the sheriffs. The sheriffs basically saying we can't have this many people in our jail because we're going to have an outbreak, and you may not care about the prisoners or the inmates or the folks that are in the jail, but boy, you better at least care about the sheriffs themselves, the deputies, the interpreters that go there, the probation folks, the employees all around. So there's a significant ability for a virus to catch on and really infect a lot of people. And so I think the sheriffs, from what we're seeing, is that the sheriffs working with district attorneys and with police about how to put certain things in place that stopped bringing people into the jail. And some of these are common sense things. For example, why don't you just give someone a summons instead of arresting them? Why don't you just give an automatic no money bond and just say personal recognizances so they don't get into the jail in the first instance? So we're seeing things like that are happening all over the state. You know, someone's on work release, go to work and go home. Don't go to work and come back to the jail. Those sort of common things that we hope that that we can continue those good practices. And I think that DAs definitely play a role in maintaining those sorts of policies and practices and procedures. And we are going to look to them to continue this decarceration in the months and years to come. Let's not go back to the bad old ways that really didn't keep people any safer. Now, we're in the very early research, I guess, on crime statistics, but we have not seen. Now, there might be a rise in crime in certain crimes, and you know, there certainly has been a lot of noise about a lot of violent crime in the Denver area, for example. But we're not seeing the dots connect that it's because people weren't put in the jail, that those are the people that are committing the crimes on the outside. So I think it will be hard, even if there is any spike in crime, it will be hard to say that it is attributable to the fact that we have these great policies and practices in place that have kept people out of the jails. So that's clearly the answer right now. We have not seen a huge decrease in the incarceration rates in the prison. And as you mentioned earlier, we are hoping that the governor would use his executive authority to release people from prison who are elderly, who are susceptible to the virus, and who clearly present no public safety risk. And those are the folks we're focusing on. The 84-year-old who has spent 30, 40 years in prison, who's suffering from dementia, who is in no way going to commit another crime if he's released. Those are the folks we're focused on, and those are the ones we're asking the governor to release.
Awesome. Thank you. That's exciting. Out of all of this, to use the word hellscape, there's an opportunity for really good systemic change. And so I will address, or we will address one more thing, and then I will let everyone have their evenings back. Again, thank you for everyone who stayed on this long. But again, the question, and people are like, well, how do we figure out where our district attorneys, what are their positions, what are their values? And yeah, again, there is a gap in that. But there are ways that I'm happy to assist further kind of outside of this and other orgs or resources or ways to research people besides just Googling their names with news articles is a good place to start. But it's also, if you don't know where your district attorney stands on something, or if they're running in a contested race and you don't know their position on something, it is absolutely your right as a constituent to ask them. There is no bubble over them. And I think, especially me when I first got into politics, it feels like, especially if you're not that political or not involved in political process, oh, I can't talk to them. I don't know, that would be my advice, unless you have any other advice, is ask them. And
no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I did mention in the chat, go to their website, blah, blah, blah. And I realize that even that might be too general, maybe not be specific enough to get really to the heart of what you're looking for. I think you gotta show up to things. You gotta go to forums and ask the questions and do all of that. But you're exactly right, Jen. They are answerable to the public. You are their constituent, and they represent you, and they should be open to your questions and concerns.
Yes. And if you're in a contest race, hit us up if you have a question. If you want help tweeting the candidates on an issue, we're happy to do that. I know our policy team definitely is. But anyway, thank you so much, Denise. Appreciate you. Thank you to everyone who came on. Jess, Kalea, our webinar extraordinaire, Delana, who's behind the scenes. We have a lot of follow-up resources to send you. And again, this is just the beginning of the campaign. Please always feel welcome to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We need each other more than ever. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.